Okay, so if we look at these statistics for some different kinds of texts that we might work with, here's a sample that I did with a bunch of Facebook posts. So I had a data set of English Facebook posts. This sort of represents more like conversation, where the K1 word list is 82% of all of the words. It's a pretty high percentage. It means we're mostly using everyday language. We can see there's a high function to content. There's lots of function words as opposed to how many content words there are. So this means that there's less ideas being conveyed, and the language is more about setting up or relating, describing the relationships between those ideas. That makes it easier to process and comprehend. The more function words there are, the easier it is to understand. Very low percentage on the academic word list, just 2%, very low on the K2. So if I know these two together, I can understand 86% of what's going on with just those 2,000 most common words in English, which is pretty good. I mean, really, learners start to get frustrated if you understand less than 90% of a word. And actually, a lot of these off-list words are probably proper nouns, which are infrequent, but which would be familiar to the readers or to the learners. So that's going to bump this up to about that 90% territory. So if these Facebook posts are going to be pretty accessible. Business letters, we can see the K1 word list has gone down a little bit to 75%. But together, there's a lot more K2 words as opposed to K1 words. But together, we're still hitting about this 85%. So we had about 85% of Facebook posts, 85% of business letters. So I would notice a difference in comprehensibility if I only knew 1,000 words in English. But if I know that 2,000 word set, these are going to be about equally comprehensible. There are a few more academic word list words, a few less off-list words. The function to content word ratio is probably about the same in terms of how easy it is to read. So here in the academic journal, we can see, wow, this is down to 67%. If I only know the K1 and the K2, I only really get 74% of the words that are in this. So that's low. It's going to be much harder for me to understand. Remember, this is what the academic word list was designed for, was to bring me up to something close to 90% if I know the blue words, the green words, and the AWL words. So that's kind of about where I want to be. That's presuming that probably a lot of these off-list words, the red ones, are going to be familiar to the readers because they know the context. So that will pull them up into that 95% territory, which is the territory you really want to be in for reading. The academic word list is a lot higher. You also see the function and content word ratios are a lot less, these are a lot closer. This is much more content heavy. There's a lot more content ideas and a lot fewer words as kind of connective tissue connecting them together. Academic writing tends to be like this. It's like coming at you hard with lots of nouns, lots of verbs, lots of adjectives, and a lot less of this sort of connective tissue, small words which tie them all together. This academic journal article, we can see that lexical density, the content words are what percent of the total? 63% is pretty high. It's a pretty high number. The type per token ratio, like I said, we've got on average 3 instances of each word. This Anglo-Saxon index versus the Greco-Latin and French cognate index, this is sort of interesting. This sort of gives me the rough proportion to what percentage of the tokens that are in this text come from the Anglo-Saxon origin. Remember we talked about the Creole history of English, that it was the Anglo-Saxons who were mostly talking about the everyday life, sort of the easy to understand concepts, the physical world, where it was the Norman French and later Latin borrowings referred to much more esoteric, more abstract topics related to higher culture, to technology, to society. So the fact that only 54% of the words in this text are Anglo-Saxon is shocking. That's a very, very low number. A very high percentage of the tokens are either from Greek or Latin or French. So this means that this is a very esoteric text, a very abstract text. We're not talking about objects that are here right now. We're talking about ideas which are removed from us and imaginary worlds that we're ascribing things to. We're doing a lot of cognitive work here. If I compare this to business letters, we see that number changes drastically. Business letters, the Anglo-Saxon goes up to 70, so that's a lot more like similar to everyday speech. There's a lot fewer of the tokens which come from French or Latin or Greek. The lexical density has gone down a little bit. and then a personal email, we can see the Anglo-Saxon goes way up to about 80%. And in everyday conversation, this number is between 85 and 90% of the words, of the tokens you would encounter are going to be Anglo-Saxon in origin. And this goes down, the lexical density has gone down. So this means basically for every content word I use, I also use a function word. So again, that makes it easier to process. The lower this number it is, the easier it is going to be to process. So how can this be used by teachers? Well, lexical density, this is going to be a measure of, I think, like how much time the learners will need to really process or comprehend the text, maybe how many times they'll need to read it in order to fully comprehend it. A more dense text is going to place a higher processing burden on readers. This ratio of function to content words is also an indication of that, like the readability of the text, how accessible it's going to be. Function words kind of give you a chance to think about the content that's presented rather than just being presented with lots and lots of new content. The percentage K1 and percentage K2, this can be really used to help shape vocabulary instruction. The learners themselves can check to see which words that they know. Are there unfamiliar words? If there's unfamiliar words which are blue, especially unfamiliar words which are blue in that first 500, that's got to be their main goal, where they direct their energy. Then if you know all of the blue words that are listed out, you can move on to the green ones and then on to the yellow ones from there. You can use this in reading. So this is often used to profile a text that I'm going to assign my learners to read or to hold them accountable toward comprehending or processing. But I can also use this tool for student writing. I can measure my own students and the statistics of their own writing. So here I've got two different business letters that were produced by students of mine in Korea. They were asked to write a business letter. And at first glance, it looks like these are both about the same level. These are probably intermediate high writers. This is kind of their final draft, so they've gotten feedback on things. They've worked on these a little bit. They may be moving up into the advanced mid territory. It depends kind of on what they're writing about, but they sort of got there on their own. So maybe let you pause this and you can read through these extracts and just kind of get a sense of what we're dealing here with Suju and Jiyoung. But let's do the analysis of Suju and Jiyoung. So their lexical density is about the same. They're very, very similar here. This was kind of striking. But that doesn't mean that they're equally in the same place as regards their lexicon. They're both professional, and this is sort of a professional number, and they're equally dense. Let's compare. So Suju is only 76% of her words are from the K1, where Jiyoung, 88% of her words are from the K1. Suju's using a lot more K2 words than Jiyoung, and the combination together is 82% for Suju and 91% for Jiyoung. So this could be that Jiyoung is talking more about broad or general topics, whereas Suju is talking about something which is more specific. It could also be that Jiyoung is playing it a little bit safer when it comes to her vocabulary. She's sticking to what she knows. She's only using those words, deploying those words that she's used a lot of times before, whereas Suju is being a little bit riskier here, is using less of the kind of the easy words, that low-hanging fruit. So I might, as a teacher, if I was going to be coaching them, like I might try to think of what are some very easy words that Jiyoung might be using, words like good or bad or different, where there might be a more sophisticated way of communicating that idea. There's obviously lots of synonyms of good, depending on exactly what kind of good you want to talk about. Or there's maybe lots of synonym for product or buy, something like purchase, that would make her sound a little bit more educated and maybe would give her the specific nuance that she's going after, rather than relying on these easy K1 words, which are okay, they're safe, but they also tend to be pretty generic. We also see the function to content word ratios. So Suju is, this is a little bit easier, like 35% of those words are content words, whereas for Jiyoung it's 46.7, so there's a lot more actual words being used and a little bit less in terms of the ratio of content to function in terms of that connective tissue. That's just in the K1.